Hey, everybody. Welcome to the May 4th meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Kanakis, and tonight we are happy to have Stevie Valdinger, also known as Stevie Coaster of Chocolatey fame, with us to be doing a demo on the new module from the PowerShell team called Crescendo. So, Stevie, I'm going to hand it over to you, so feel free to take it away whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so this is the GitHub repository for the Crescendo module. So you can find it github.com/PowerShell/Crescendo. That's where all the source code lives. Some information, links to the documentation, etc., etc. So if you're looking to get started, this is where you can go to find information to get you to all the places you're going to want to go. One of the links on the README goes out to the documentation, which is found on docs.microsoft.com. Big long link, so I'm not going to worry about telling it to you there. Just go to the GitHub repository. It'll take you right to it. You've got your overview, and then you're getting started section here. So it teaches you how to install Crescendo, basic information about using it, the different commandlets that are inside of the module, etc., etc., etc. We're not going to spend a great amount of time going through the docs and the different commandlets that are available via the module. I'm going to spend a whole lot of time walking through the JSON and explaining to you kind of the point and how you can modify the JSON, write the JSON, and get the working code out of it at the end. So really, to take a quick step back and kind of explain the point of this thing, right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, for the people at home, like,
yeah,
what is Crescendo?
Yeah,
like, what is it? What's its purpose?
So Crescendo, and we can demonstrate it relatively easily on the command line here. So it takes a native command that ships, perhaps it ships on box on your Mac or on your Windows machine or on your Linux machine. Think things like ping.exe or ipconfig.exe or netstat or whatever that native command is that returns string output that's really ugly, really hard to deal with. Crescendo takes that native command and the output and wraps it in PowerShell to give you a PowerShell command that you run and gives you a PowerShell object back as the output, which enables you to do all the cool, fun things that you like to do with PowerShell to use that native tool. For example, if I run Vagrant global status, and we'll get to the meat and potatoes and make this really PowerShelly in a few minutes. But this is the native command for getting the Vagrant status of machines that are currently provisioned on your workstation here. Ta-da! Nice and simple, but it's really ugly. That sucks to have to figure that out and automate it and be able to do other things with it the same way that you would expect to do with PowerShell. You would want to do things like pipe it to where object or a group object or select object or for each object or whatever you want to do. It's much easier to do those things when it's a PowerShell object as opposed to string data. And that's where Crescendo kind of comes to the rescue.
And does Crescendo just do this automatically? You just point Crescendo at something and it does it magically, or is this some setup?
It does a lot of it magically, but there is some setup to it, and that's kind of what we're going to dive into once we start reading the JSON. Now, I did mention that there is some PowerShell commands that you can run as part of the module. So if we do git command module Crescendo, do I not have it loaded? I might not even have it imported in here.
So I asked you that question knowing the answer. So what I was going to try to convey to people is that Crescendo allows you to do a little bit of work up front, setting up basically a matrix that when this command is run, do this, And then what it does is it produces some code for you that you can then use going forward, right? That's the idea.
Yeah. So here's all the different things that you can do to help you create a Crescendo module. New Crescendo command will scaffold out part of the JSON. It doesn't do all of the JSON that you would want. And new parameter info gives you part of the JSON that you would want, but probably not all of the JSON that you would want. So being that it just shipped and it's kind of brand new and not a lot of people are using it yet, there's still work to do and feedback to give, and they're going to be releasing new things, et cetera, and making this better and better as we move on. And that's why I like to just interact with the JSON at the minute. It's easier to interact with the JSON for me than it is to try and run these commandlets and get partial JSON and then have to figure out what else I want to add.
So let's jump ahead for a second. Perry Harris just asked a fantastic question in chat, which is the code that's generated only usable on this box or can use it on other systems? And so there's a little bit of an answer to that, but what you're going to do, Perry, is you're going to build some code in the form of a module. And then once you have a module, you can take that module and you can use it on other systems. You can share it with people. So you're going to do a one-time build through a simple process, which is then going to essentially build some PowerShell commandlets and a module. And then it's just like any other module. You can share that module with one or many machines.
Yep, exactly. You get a PowerShell module. Yeah. What you do with it at that point is up to you. You've got the PSM one, you've got the PSD one. You can zip those off and ship them somewhere. You can put them in source control that people can clone and use. You can publish them to an internal NuGet repository, and then you can use install module to install those things. If you're doing things that way, which I would recommend you do that. But yeah, it is functionally a module at the end of it. So you can consume it however you want. You can share it however you want. So let's dive into what the JSON actually looks like. This is the JSON file for the OpenSSL module that we're going to be writing as part of this talk. And I'm going to delete just these two files. That way we can see everything from start to finish at the end of it. And the JSON has a schema associated with it. So the very first line after you open your JSON file is the schema declaration. Put that URL in, and then you start getting things like syntax highlighting. So we can come in here and we can say noun, and it'll fill it in and do all those nice fun things for you. So the schema is really, really great, and it holds your hand a lot. And that's why I don't get scared at editing this JSON, because the schema is so good, the IntelliSense is so good, it kind of helps me know what I want. Oh, excuse me. So in this, I'm fully qualifying the path to the native command that I want to wrap. You don't have to. I have a habit of fully qualifying things just so I can ensure that on my system it's going to work. But if you are going to ship this module and give it to other people, that's probably a not great thing. So the better thing in that situation would probably be to just call the native command directly and rely on it being on the path of whatever target system it's going to run on. That will make it safe if somebody like installs OpenSSL to a different directory than the default that the installer gives it, or somebody is running a Windows machine and OpenSSL is installed in program files, and then you give it to somebody who's on a Mac and it's in user bin. So if you hard code those kind of things, it's probably going to break depending on who you give it to. So this is the better way to go.
So Stevie, Stephen Judd was just asking, is there anything, and are you aware of any ways that you could use multiple paths based on OS type?
Yeah. It's in this node, I believe, if I would type on my keyboard correctly. Platform. So this is an array and it takes strings. So you can tell it what platform it runs on. So you can say Linux, and you can say Mac OS, and you can say Windows. So that will allow that command, this particular command, to run on these 3 platforms. So if it's going to be Windows only, there you go.
So that's for running the command. But what about multi-paths to find the executable in different spots for different OSs?
This is just a string. It's not an array. So
Okay.
no, it wouldn't be a multi-path thing. Now, if you do this, it doesn't matter as long as the path is correct, because every system has a path. Like, I can open up my terminal and type OpenSSL, and it drops me into OpenSSL, and I can do the same thing on Windows. But yes, I am looking at the chat now, and it would not support side by side as it stands. So if you had multiple versions of OpenSSL installed at different paths, it probably would get a little hairy.
And I'll say that the platform there only informs the module manifest that gets created. There's nothing that enforces the platform or selects the platform definition here. But that would be an interesting thing to feature request to file in the Crescendo repo. So you could have one command. You could duplicate essentially that commandlet definition for different platforms and use different paths. That might be an interesting feature to suggest.
So Sean sort of beat me to the punch here. I was going to say essentially that, so what we're working with today with the Crescendo module is actual blessed Microsoft code. But I don't think that they would call it feature complete. I think they have a working module that can do some really great things, which Steve is going to show you tonight. But I think also part of the thing here is, as this gets some uptake with the community, there's some expectation, just like that question. Hey, we didn't think of that scenario. Maybe we can add in some code to handle those different types of things. So we may not be able to answer every question, or there may not be code available to handle every scenario that you think of today. But the point that Sean is making is that this is an open source tool. It's community driven. Microsoft is sort of leading that charge and writing the code, but the ideas that come from the community are definitely considered and tried to be incorporated into this module. So head to the GitHub repo, open an issue with your ideas. I'm sure Jason and team would love to consider putting that in their module.
Oh, they definitely would. So what's next for this? So we've given it the original name. This is the name of the command line application or utility that you want to wrap. And then our verb and our noun, that's standard PowerShell stuff, verb noun syntax for PowerShell commands. So in this example, I'm going to convert to PFX certificate. So when we call it on the command line, it's going to be literally convert to PFX certificate is what we'll call once we have the module done. And original command elements. So sometimes a native command has subcommands before you get to parameters. So for example, if you were to do like ping-4, that would be native command and a parameter. Whereas something like OpenSSL can do a whole bunch of stuff, and it handles doing that whole bunch of stuff via subcommands. So in the case of converting some kind of certificate to a PFX certificate, The subcommand for that is OpenSSL PKCS12, and then your ins and your outs and your keys and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of your parameters come after that. So what the original command elements array does is appends all of those subcommand things to the command. That way, when you define your parameters, you are actually defining the PowerShell equivalent to whatever the native command parameter is. And I've found that you can cheat this a little bit and have multiple command elements to kind of lock things down and make it simpler for writing very specific commandlets, instead of having one commandlet that does several things kind of okay. You can have one commandlet that does one thing well, the same way you should have a script that does one thing and one thing well, and then hands it off to another script that does one thing and one thing well. The same can be true for the module code that gets produced by Crescendo, and that once we get down here to this other set of examples, by adding more subcommands to the original command elements array, we reduce the number of parameters so that we have to define and worry about an end user actually passing to the commandlet that we produce. So we kind of create our own little walled garden of what we want the end user to be able to do with the commandlet, and we can kind of help control that via this original command elements array here. And then, of course, after we have our binary and our verb and our noun and our command elements, we start to define our parameters. The name of the parameter will be the name of the PowerShell equivalent, so -export in this case. The original name is the parameter from the native command, so if that's -export as it is here, or some native commands are very like -- whatever the command happens to be. So whatever you typically pass to the native command is the original name in this example. And then what kind of PowerShell parameter do you want this to be? So in this case, we're going to make this a switch, and we're going to say this is a mandatory parameter. You must pass export to this command. Now, I probably could have come up here and gone like this and said export and eliminated this parameter, because it's mandatory that you pass a switch. That seems really, really silly to do that. The switch is either on or it's off. Why force it to always be on? That the UX of that is kind of silly. So that's why I left this in here, to illustrate that by adding that -export to the original command elements, you get rid of that bad UX and you can get rid of that parameter, and they don't have to worry about passing that -export anymore. So now all they have to worry about is their in, their key, their out, and their export password.
Hey, Stephen.
Mhm.
For the original command elements, I noticed when I was using that, it always added those in before any of the parameters that I set below.
Mhm.
For things like Android ADB, I have to define the serial number first, which is usually one of my parameters. Can I change when it adds
Oh.
the other commands?
I don't believe you can as of right now. That might be an issue that needs filed on the repository. Maybe, I know since Sean's here, maybe he's got an answer or a link to an issue that already exists for that. So I don't.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think I would start with an issue
Yeah.
so that you can describe what you're trying to accomplish. Because that's an interesting one, and that's one I don't think Jim Truer designed for, but
Mhm.
might be worth taking a closer look at. So,
Thank you much.
Yeah,
yep.
it's kind of nice having the guy in the talk too. So what else do we have here? We have our in, which is going to be the thing that we're converting. We're going to have the private key that's associated with that certificate that we want to convert. And then we have the PFX file that we're going to be producing, and then the password for that PFX file in terms of importing it onto the system. Now, this is kind of lazy and not super well defined. So to showcase how good it could be, I've added a few more commands that use a bit more of the JSON schema to show you just how close to a real PowerShell command, like if you were to write this all yourself, Crescendo can actually get you today. So we still have our verb and our noun. We have convert from PEM file as the commandlet that we're going to write here. We have our description. We have our usage statement, which has a synopsis, and it has a few more items that we can do as well. And I haven't really used these. I haven't dug into exactly what these do or what they are used for, but I did want to showcase that there are other things that pop up in this usage statement that probably flow into the help if I had to guess. And I'm guessing that original text is the text for the native commands help, or some form of help from the native command, if I had to guess.
Yeah, that was Jim's intent. You can copy the output from the help of the tool itself and put it in that original text, and you would see that in get help. So you have the PowerShell help beside the original tool help.
Yeah.
Helps you better understand what's going on.
Right. Yeah. I had a feeling that's what original text was, but again, I haven't played with everything you can do in the schema yet, so there are some things that I'm not familiar with. So what else do we have here? We have our parameters node and our command elements. So for this is an X509 subcommand, and we are being very descriptive and saying, hey, for this, we are going to convert this from a PEM file, but it's going to be to a DER file, and the only thing that you can do is a DER. And for the PEM file, we've given it the original parameter. We've given it the PowerShell name that you're going to pass, the parameter name for the PowerShell commandlet. You must pass this because it's mandatory. And this additional parameter as attributes array is where things get a little bit interesting. So these are just strings, but you can do all those extra decorators that you could do inside of a PowerShell command. So for example, if you were to start defining commandlet binding and parameter, and you have a parameter, it's did I type that right? Yeah, it's mandatory. It's a string. It's got an alias of thing, and what else? You could do all of this stuff here. So like validate sets or validate scripts, etc., etc. Or if you wanted to get too super crazy into the weeds, you could write an argument completer in here as well to do all kinds of fun things. And foo. So all of this different stuff here can all be defined here as strings. So if I wanted to come in here and do, oops, what did I do there? I could do an alias of PEM, for example. And then this parameter would have an alias of just PEM, or whatever I want. I don't actually want to do that, though. Put that on. Better. Perfect. So that's what additional parameter attributes are for. And then again, this is going to be a string. So in this example, I've added this validate script that's going to say, hey, if somebody gives me a PEM file, make sure the extension actually is .pem. If it's anything else, throw an error. And that gives me validation right here early, and fails super early before any code runs, so that they get a good message back and says, hey, because this isn't an extension or isn't the correct extension, then go fix it.
And I just wanted to point out here, Stevie, that for those that might be looking at this and going, ooh, there's a bit I have to fill out. Stevie is filling this stuff out because these are all, let's just say, switches on the original program.
Mhm.
If you had a program that had 2 switches, you'd only have 2 parameters to build. This one happens to have a number more. He did that. He used this one on purpose because to show you the flexibility that you have. But if you have a simpler executable that just has 1 or 2 parameters, then your build out is going to be much smaller as well.
Yeah.
And this is a one-time build.
Yeah, I didn't want to do something like super simple that only had like 1 or 2 parameters, because then this would be super short and boring. But I didn't want to do like cube control either, because we'd be here until Friday talking through all the parameters.
If
that
you
wouldn't
agree
be
that's how it's pronounced.
Sure, that's fine. That's how I pronounce it.
That's throwing some shade to a Summit Lightning demo. The point here is that this PowerShell team has given us a framework to take unstructured work in the form of a commandlet of a program that has some switches that return data, but the data that comes back is just text, and allows us to build some structure around it so that when the data comes back, that text turns into objects. And then, as Stevie led in, once it's an object and once it's PowerShell aware, you get to do all the things that you do in PowerShell. This is the build to make that work. So also remember, my group had a gentleman on about 2 years ago who showed how to do this same process without this for a simple command line utility. And it was a 45-minute demo to figure out how to do just the basics. And he just barely got it working, and it worked, but it was, I would say, 10 times the amount of work that Stevie is putting in here to get the same sort of functionality.
Yeah, and honestly, once you do play with this schema once or twice, it's really friendly, and it's not that hard to understand what you need. Because if you think about it, when you're writing a PowerShell function, you need a verb and you need a noun, and you sure as hell better be writing comment-based help for your function. So you're going to have a description and a synopsis and examples. Like, you're not done until you have that stuff. So all that stuff exists in this JSON. There's your description, there's your usage. Now, it's a little weird that usage has more than one thing and your synopsis is inside it. However, once you're kind of doing it once or twice, it's not too bad. And then it's your parameters. And what do you normally do with your parameters? You give them a name. You decide whether they're mandatory or not. You can do things like parameter set name stuff. So parameter set name, you might want this to be in a foo parameter set and a bar parameter set, and everything else be in like a default parameter set, et cetera, et cetera. You can do all of that stuff inside of this JSON. So it's all there, more or less. It's just a different format than what you're used to writing.
Right. What it does is it separates defining all of the commandlet user interface. It puts that all in the JSON, and then your code that does the work of converting the output to objects is separate. So you don't have to worry about writing all the code that does the parameter handling and validation and all that stuff. It's defined here. So it separates those into two different files.
Exactly. What else was I going to point out? On this particular, so skipping around functions just a little bit because we've kind of covered most of the bits and pieces here. For new certificate signing request, I've added some examples. So there's an examples node here that is an array, and this particular node, there's only one example. So command new certificate signing request, the description, which will show up under the example, is generates a CSR with a private key, and then the original command is OpenSSL and blah, blah, blah. You get that. And what it does is it takes the original command, what you have here, and it converts it into the equivalent PowerShell from Crescendo when you do get help for this particular function once we export the module, or import the module rather, once it's built. And for this one, I've given a couple of aliases for new CSR and just CSR. I realized that might collide with something from the gallery. Maybe I just pulled this stuff out of my butt, if I'm honest. So I have no idea if this is going to cause collisions with anything or not long term. But as a proof of concept, to prove a point, you can do aliases high level for the functions themselves, not just the parameters as well. And that is about it for this particular JSON file. I'm not going to save any of the changes that I made to this one, but I am going to start building the PowerShell module. So let me get my shell in the right place here. And Corey will be mad at me if I don't do it over here because it's pretty. So if I do OpenSSL export Crescendo module and then configuration file, this is where we do the configuration file is that JSON file, and then we give it a module name, and we'll call this module OpenSSL. And I don't need to force it because we haven't ran this command yet. There's no PSM1, PSD1. If you have already generated this module and you do this, it will say it already exists, and that's where you can say force, and it will actually do it forcefully for you. So with that said, we can see now that we've got our OpenSSL, PSD1, PSM1, and those are your bog standard PSD1s and PSM1s. Only you didn't have to lift a finger. It figured out the functions to export, put them all in there. It did all that work for you. It's got the aliases to export. It's done everything you need to make this work is done in the PSD1. And then the PSM1, they did write all the PowerShell code for you. So full stop. You didn't write any of this. You had to write a damn JSON file, and you got a PowerShell module out of it. So this is what you get. Yes, it looks probably different than the way you would write it. However, there's a reason for it. It's because they're doing really clever things to make the native command to PowerShell hook work really, really, really well. But it's all in there. You didn't have to lift a finger for this. So let's play with it a little bit. So if we come over here, we can start importing this module. So if I say import module, and then we say OpenSSL PSD1, I don't think I have it imported already from another time, but just in case.
So Stevie, before you get too far ahead, how does version numbering work with the module builds? Does it increment numbers? Do you have any idea about that?
Where is it at? I think there is a version in here somewhere. I swear I saw a version somewhere.
All right.
I swear I saw a module version somewhere in this.
Control F.
And well, no, it's not in this JSON as it exists now.
Control click the schema URL.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to do that actually. So I can say Control F and say version. Actually, I should probably learn how to type. Actually, it's not in there. I swear I saw.
No, I don't think it is. So it might be on the export command. You can there's a parameter for version. Maybe that's where you saw it.
You know what? I think you're right. No.
I'm trying to remember, but you can always edit the module manifest after the fact.
So what we're really saying here is that it's not automatic versioning and version control right now.
Yeah.
There's nothing to stop you from going in and manually creating your own versions and incrementing them up.
Right. Yeah. You can always have like a build step that.
Yeah. There's a gentleman named Adam.
This.
There's a gentleman named Adam in the chat was looking forward to this meeting because he's doing similar tasks and was trying to learn from you. He's kind of figured some of this stuff out already. He says there's nothing in the schema.
So I use, when I'm building PowerShell modules, like pure PowerShell modules, not something that wraps a native command. I use a tool called get version, and then push tags to my repository, and get version picks up those tags and asserts the correct version for the module based on commit history and the tags that I've pushed to the repository. And then I have a build step that updates the module manifest with that version number from the output of get version. So if you're doing something in CI where you've got a native command that a team of developers is working on for your organization or your company, and you want to have a PowerShell way of interacting with that native command for obvious reasons, because PowerShell is amazing and string data sucks, you could write this JSON file or give them all the information they need to maintain this JSON schema on their own as part of their build process. And then at the same time that they release a new version of their tool, this JSON file is used to generate the corresponding version of a PowerShell module for that version of that native command. And then you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, Adam Driscoll actually has this. If you just search for him and Crescendo, he's got a whole build pipeline.
Is it for sysinternals?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me see if I can find that.
He's done some pretty cool stuff with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's defining, I think I've looked through this actually. So he just uses hash tables to define like the different command element stuff. So this is relatively friendly. And then his build script just takes those, where's his build script? There it is. It reads in all of those different source files, and it starts to generate the JSON for it. So it has partials, and then it does different things, and then it fills everything out based on the hash tables that he's provided. And then at the end of that, he converts all of that to JSON, which gives you your manifest for Crescendo, what Crescendo needs. And then he calls export Crescendo module. It's actually really freaking clever because Adam Driscoll is really freaking clever like that. And then here's his update module manifest. This is where he's catching that version to update the PSD1. Now I would probably do this part slightly differently than what he's doing, because he's just kind of got it hard coded up here as version 1. And then I think he does something to increment it. Maybe it's been a minute since I've been in here. But this is where you could do the work of having a build step that runs git version and pulls the tags and the commit history and asserts the version and store that to like an environment variable on your CI run. And then inside of here, instead of version, if you're using like Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, it would be an environment variable that you could just access and pass to this. Would be a more CI approach to doing it. But this is really, really clever. So I don't know. Can I put this in the chat? Actually, you know what? Let me just do this. Here's a really good example of Crescendo stuff. And then let's go back here and let's see if this actually runs, because some of this I've ran before, some of it is brand new, and I actually don't have all the stuff that I need to run most of this. Like, I don't have PEMs and all that good stuff to do this. I do have the stuff to do this though. So if I were to say convert to PFX certificate, and remember what all I said. Actually, you know what? Here's what we can do. Or is this the broken one that I didn't do anything for? Convert to PFX certificate. And give me the syntax. That's all I need. So PFX certificate in, and I believe I put certs cert, and what else do I have? I have an in key, and I believe I have a cert key file in there. I do. And then out file, let's do cert/cert.pfx, and then an export password of did I break the
You need $true.
I do. I'm just gonna have to pass it like that. No. What I do. Export. What I do. Because I swear that I fixed this. I've run this before and it worked. So what did I break? So in key, out file, password. What am I missing? PKCS.
You're live now, so this is when it would happen.
Yeah, this is when I would. This is exactly when it would happen. So what am I missing from the?
Do a demo, lose a sale.
Mm-hmm. Export name file. Yeah, that's what I did. thought I did put this back. Oops. Let's see. Get rid of this and put it in this array for one, because so we have our dash in, we have our in key, search, we have in key, we have our out.
Do you need a space after pass colon, or does that need to
No,
be?
no, it needs to be right like that.
No. So the password
Or-
value has to be without a space.
Yeah. Oh, you know
So-
what I did? You know what? Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think that's what's breaking it.
So there's an option for the parameter.
Yeah,
I forget
need
what it's
a-
called. It's
I
no
need,
space,
yeah, I need no gap.
no gap. Yeah.
Yep.
I was going to ask you about that earlier.
Yeah, because I'm making that mandatory as false because you might not want a password. So I added that up there, so that's fine. Let me get rid of that space there. Come over here, and let's hope the demo gods are nicer to me now. So export Crescendo module. What is it doing? There it is. And then let's do, I shouldn't need that anymore. And that's going to fail still. However, this should prompt me for that. So it's definitely something with the export password parameter. But if we look in here, here's my PFX. And just to prove that I'm not blowing smoke, we'll clear the screen and do it one more time. And there it is. So it's definitely something in this that it doesn't like. What that is, though, I'm not sure.
So Stevie, if you have a second,
Yeah,
maybe
go for
just peek at the chat because there's a few guys commenting
it.
on what
Okay.
you're doing. Maybe they have some helpful tips here. No gap accounts for the white space. He's asking about that. Oh, I guess Adam was answering David.
Does it care that it's a regular string versus a secure string since you're talking about a credential?
It shouldn't. No, because on the command line for OpenSSL, it's just a string. Because for OpenSSL, when you're doing it, it's OpenSSL PKCS12 password pass whatever, and then export, and then in, and then you're out, and then you're in key, et cetera, So I would expect that no gap.
Yeah, that's what no gap is for.
Yes.
Is it appends the parameter, the argument passed to the parameter to the end of the string without a space. The default is it always includes a space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. This might yell at me. Yeah, that's what it passed. Unless I have this wrong, I could have this coded wrong. It
Syntax.
it might be a weird syntax thing. Although I don't think it is. Password
I'm
P.
looking on another help document here. It is dash password space pass colon your password.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Could just be Open SSL hating me during a demo, which is totally fine. That's
You
totally
can also
fine.
grab the output from that verbose. It gives you the command at the bottom. I usually grab that, copy and paste to run a test.
Adam, it's pretty hard to hear you. You sound like you're distant from your mic.
I'm sorry. Yeah, normally what I was doing when I was having problems, I grab that text and try to manually run it.
Worked just fine.
Yeah, so something doesn't like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there it is. It just doesn't like me, and that is perfectly fine with me. We'll just chalk it up to
Wow.
we'll just chalk it up to demo gods and move on to the next thing. And we can come back to it later if I really care to dive in and figure out what's going on, which it would be nice to figure out what's going on there. But not now. Let's move on to bigger and better. Although this is going to be largely the same, but I wanted to show you one of the cool parts of Crescendo. Like what we just didn't have any output, right? It just generated a PFX file and you got your PX file and you moved on with your day. It's fine. But there are times where the native command you run, you expect output and then to do something with that output. And that's where Crescendo really, really, really shines, is in these output handlers. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can do output handlers. You can define them as functions, you can define them as scripts, and you can define them as inline. And if you go out to the documentation, somewhere on here is a link out to a bunch of blog posts written by Mr. Sean, who is in the chat and on the call here. And he goes through output handler stuff. So how do you define one? How do you write one? What does that look like? So almost largely the same thing as what he's doing in those blog posts. I've written a couple parsers for things that I do in Vagrant as well. So for the get Vagrant status commandlet, I'm not going to cover a bunch of this in depth because we've been over it for the OpenSSL stuff. But for get Vagrant status, I've told Crescendo that, hey, I've got this function on this system. PowerShell knows about this function. It's called parse Vagrant status. And I want you to use that to parse the output of this native command and give me a PowerShell object back. So in my example earlier, what I did was I ran vagrant global status on the command line and I got this output back. Well, if I were to come in here, cd into vagrant and import vagrant.psd1, force that, and if I were to run get vagrant status now, I think they're still loaded. Perfect. I get PowerShell objects back instead of whatever this stuff was.
So did it just dump all of that chatty description at the end?
It did. Yeah. Because I told it to. If we look at parse vagrant status, so if we look at vagrant global status, again, I know that in my output, this first line contains my columns, and that there's nothing that I want from this line, and all of my data lives here, and then all the rest of this stuff is just junk, so I don't need it. So in my parse vagrant status file, I say, hey, give me the output. So lines is basically an array of the output. So all of those lines coming from the output of vagrant global status is what this function takes. And then I say, hey, give me everything but the last 7 lines. And then for each of those lines, the columns, I'm going to split on the spaces where object, and then I'm going to build my object out of that. And then if it's not equal to ID and it's not equal to a dash, meaning this basically just took all of this and said, hey, split here, ignore all the spaces, that's a column, this is data, this is data, this is data, this is data. Technically, this is still going to match, so this gets captured. And then this is data, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And then we build our object out of all of those different chunks. And I think I have actually one. No, I have them all in there. Yeah. And then this just says, hey, where the ID is not equal to this and it's not equal to this, return everything else. So I get my data back. And then because I skipped all of this junk, it's effectively ignored because I only grabbed this bit here. So there is some work that you need to do for the output to make it work. And sometimes the regex is really, really scary, and you end up with 3 problems instead of 1 problem, because you have the problem of needing to parse the output, you have the problem of not understanding the regex, and then you have the problem of not understanding why the regex is actually working. But eventually you get it working. And to Judd's point in the chat, regex really isn't that scary once you've done it quite a bit. But depending on what you're doing, I have this really bad habit of doing named captures so that I can do things with matches a little bit easier, because that just in my brain, it helps me a lot. So I will match on, like, I'll have a named match for ID, a named match for name, provider, state, directory, etc. So it's my own fault that my regex is 14 miles long, because I name absolutely everything when I don't have to. But it does help to be a little bit clearer when you're doing things. It's kind of self-documenting, at least to me, when I'm doing regex. The name stuff really helps me. But that's all there is to it. Now, you could do that inline. It doesn't have to be a function like I've defined it here in this JSON file. It absolutely doesn't have to be a function, because if it's a function, PowerShell needs to be aware of this. So it will have to be able to say parse vagrant status, for example, and find it. So I .source these files first. You could pass it. I believe you can just pass it the script directly from here too. So
Yeah, so if you use the handler type of function, all the functions have to be in the function provider in your session.
yeah.
And what export Crescendo does is it copies those functions into the module that it creates. If the type is set to script, then it just calls the script, which means you have to ship the script with your module. But the benefit from the developer side of that is you can change the code in the external scripts without having to re-export your module, because it's just calling that external script file. So you can test it that way. And then inline has to go in the JSON, and who wants to write PowerShell code inside of a JSON string?
Yeah, that's going to get really long, really ugly, and it's going to suck.
It's good for things where you have a native command that has an option for like JSON output or CSV output.
Yeah, because then you could do something like
Handler.
args.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like arg0 convert from JSON, and then your
Right.
handler type could be
inline
here. And then I think you need to define.
Oh, no, it's so the value of handler is your string.
Yeah, that's where it is. So this would move up here like that. Well, if it would format correctly. Let me see if I can format. Ooh, Jesus. That looks absolutely terrible because I can't type today. Grab this and put it in there. So it would look something like that if you were to do it inline. And arg0 will just be the output of the native command in this example. And I am not going to save that because I want to do some other stuff. What else do I want to do? So there are some other functions that are in this module. So get module vagrant. So I can get the vagrant status, which I've already shown you. And you get the output of that. You can do get vagrant box and list all the vagrant boxes that are currently installed on this machine. I think, yeah, there's an issue that exists for this already, but just to show you what I mean. So if I were to do get vagrant box dash name, for example, and said Ubuntu / trusty 64, still gives me everything. It ignores the parameters, doesn't do the filtering on the output. Now, that's because I believe it's because it's giving me this and then ignoring this part in here, because I do have a name parameter in my parser that I should be accepting. However, Crescendo is sending the output of this, but it's not sending this parameter as well. So similar to how you would have like args 0 basically. And that's not going to show up very well in this color scheme. Apologies. So let me just do like, why is it doing such a bad color? Yeah, it's there. I don't understand what it's doing there. But arg0, args1 for all that stuff. So arg0 would be native command output. args1 would be this name thing. So you do have to do your pipeline goodness. So where name equals Ubuntu trusty 64, for example, and you just get Ubuntu back. But that's the power of the Crescendo stuff, in that you get a PowerShell object back, and then you can do PowerShell things with it. So like convert to JSON. That's pretty schwanky if you ask me. And I am stuffing this in an actual version, not a string. It is a true version, so that's why this JSON looks like this. Any other questions? I'm kind of running to the end of it, so.
I was
Adam
gonna
had
say that it is
one,
pretty cool.
and so Adam, your question about parameter sets named, yes, you can have different handlers for different parameter sets.
Yes.
Actually, in my blog posts, I have examples that do that.
So we've had a lot of questions from a small handful of people, and we have a bunch of people on the call. I just want to make sure that we didn't lose the bulk of the people along the way, make sure they're kind of okay with where we are. Sorry, just had
So
a
one,
fucking attack. Does anybody need just a basic overview that maybe Stevie went too fast on, or something that didn't make sense? Does anybody need anything to review?
so one of the common things with OpenSSL is to do like, looking for certs or cert expirations or, TLS protocols. All of that stuff is random, generally it's coming back in a blob of text and you're having to grep it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any benefit to moving that into the Crescendo model here, or are you still essentially having to build the regex or building some sort of a match pattern to kind
You
of
do.
extract out that subset of data?
Yeah, you do. So, what I can't remember. What is it? OpenSSL S_client, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
And then
like
connect.
chocolate.org.
You'd have to do like a dash connect.
Yeah. So
And then
let's see.
like show certs is a fairly common one, or
Yeah.
just looking through all of this data.
Yeah, so it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And you would have to write a parser that does the right thing to give you an object back for what you care about. That's the thing. Like, I don't really care about this part, right? I want this part. And that's all I care about. So I can say, hey, for these lines, select object first 8, 9, 10, whatever,
Sure.
and then only deal with this chunk. And then that's a smaller amount of regex that I have to figure out, because I can do positive look aheads and look behinds to figure out what all of this stuff means. And then I can get certificates back out of it.
But there's one kind of thing to consider here that didn't sort of come up, which is the questions that Clem are asking that you're answering are all, I think they're all based on the premise that they're repeatable searches, right? So that the data that comes back that you're looking for, the same stuff exists in some sort of a pattern, or you're searching for a pattern that's repeatable. Because if it's returning data every time in different formats and different layouts, that's the point where you want to do the grepping afterwards, because every time it's unique. If it's the same every time, well, why not just roll that regex search into the commandlet and let it do it for you? That's I think the key point there.
Yeah, exactly. Like the native command output is going to be consistent. Like every time you run this command, it's going to give you this, or it's going to give you an error. So handle that. Do the regex correctly, or do something else. Give you some other kind of message if the output is from an error and it fails your regex. Like, that's kind of the point, because once you have that regex, you create a PS custom object out of it. You now can do all that other fun stuff with it. You can pipe it to whatever you want. You can send it down the pipeline to another command that does further processing. You can filter on it. You can convert it to other formats. You could email it. You could convert it to an HTML web page. You could invoke REST method it somewhere else. Like, the sky's the limit once it's a PowerShell object. You've got literally PowerShell at your fingertips. Do whatever the frickin' heck you want at that point. Crescendo is the accelerator that gets. If you've ever watched *Halt and Catch Fire*, Joe McMillan, this is the quote: "Crescendo is the thing that gets you to the thing." Whereas in *Halt and Catch Fire*, computers are the thing that gets you to the thing. The internet being the thing.
Pretty good, pretty well said there. All right, so I'm gonna make a final call here for our attendees in person to funnel some questions up to Stevie. Otherwise, I think Stevie's probably getting ready to wrap up here.
Stevie, this is Perry. I think the one area where I missed it, maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention right at the beginning. How did you start with the JSON? I mean, was a template made from some command, or because you started out here with a whole bunch of stuff in it?
I did. It's because I cheated, because Sean did a lot of the work for me. So if you go out to the docs page and find his blog,
Yeah, so you can start by manually copying that template, or actually in the documentation itself.
yeah, there is some stuff in there.
Yeah, go to the documentation page and create a new commandlet. Yeah, so scroll down, you'll see I gave you the code right there. That creates a new Crescendo command, and then keep going. Here's your new configuration, and scroll back up, that new configuration. So yeah, so this is how, so we've created that command in the previous step, and we're assigning that command to the .commands array of the new configuration object. And then you can convert that to JSON. So that builds out the JSON framework, and then you can start editing the JSON.
Yeah, so
Okay.
this gives you this.
Right. And Adam Driscoll's system internals examples takes this even farther with other Crescendo commandlets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Mr. Driscoll makes me sick. He's super clever, dude.
And while you're there, Stevie, expand the reference node in the TOC on the left there, bottom.
There it is.
Yeah, and then Crescendo. Yeah. So there's the commandlet reference.
Yeah, so you can get all of the different.
Yep.
Yeah. All of the different help for all the different commands. Yeah. So I'm done. There's no more other questions.
All right, so why don't we wrap up here? There's some very happy people in the chat here. There's some people that came into this meeting looking for some answers for things they were trying to do on their own. And I think Stevie and Sean have basically filled in the gaps. So one thing I want to point out here that is assumed that may not be apparent is, first of all, I feel like the Crescendo module is just another example of the code that the PowerShell team has been releasing probably what I can remember the last 2 years. Even in the preview, early release versions, it's very solid code. You can do a lot with it very early on. Do I expect the Crescendo module to have multiple iterations to come out with more feature sets to come into it? Sure. But right now, even at this very early stage, this is a functional tool that's very well built by the team, and it's very well thought out. Adding on to that, we have been lucky over the last few months to have Sean Wheeler and members of his team attend our user group. Sean, for those that are not aware, is responsible for the documentation, or one of the members that's responsible for the documentation for the PowerShell core language. And Sean has been putting in an inordinate amount of time over the past year and a half trying to write very detailed documentation, but also build up the other areas involved with PowerShell and the stuff that they're releasing to give people a really good idea about what's happening. So I think that combination of great modules coming out, excellent documentation to support it, makes it easy for people like Stevie to jump in and figure out how to do this stuff. So this gentleman like Adam in the chat here, Adam needed a few holes filled in, but essentially you can get yourself started from the docs and the code that exists today through Sean's examples, his blog posts, and the module that's out there. If you start simple, maybe OpenSSL is probably not the first command that you want,
Yeah.
command line tool you want to start with.
I wouldn't do OpenSSL first.
Yeah,
I'm
and I don't know that I would, and I don't know that I would go for ipconfig if the PowerShell team has essentially written commandlets already to replicate a lot of what ipconfig does. But
with
as
pink.
yeah, well, like Stevie pointed out, Vagrant, it's a really good example, right? It's a tool that you might be using, maybe DC Diag or some other tools that you're using for outside of the PowerShell world, right? And you want to bring that in. So baby steps get you to the finish line.
Let me plug this too. I put a command in the chat. You can run find module with the tag Crescendo. There are currently three Crescendo modules published to the gallery. One of them is called Foil, which is a wrapper for chocolatey.
The audacity.
Yeah. And that's the thing. When you create a Crescendo module, the manifest has metadata in it that indicates it's a Crescendo generated module, and the gallery will automatically pick that up as a tag.
Nice.
And so Crescendo, I think, has probably been out about 4 months, if I remember correctly. Something like that, maybe a little longer.
It GA'd in March.
Okay,
End of March, I think.
April, May. So 3-4 months, and there was some preview releases. But so you just need to understand that this is a module that people are just starting to get their feet around. People like Stevie and Adam Driscoll are sort of setting a trail for others to follow. And as you come along, you'll fill in the pieces so you can build your own stuff. So we would like to encourage you to go out, try this module, find some command line tools that you could use. I can think of like disk utilities that come from vendors that are all string-based, just regular output, that would be really useful for this kind of stuff. Play with them, use the community, use Sean and the PowerShell team to ask questions through the repos, submit issues, ask questions, let them help you fill in the gaps, the things that you don't understand. And that's how you get started with this tool. So with that, I think I want to say thank you to Stevie for presenting tonight and sharing with us. I appreciate this, especially after 5 days doing this prior at Summit. So thank you so much for the time. If you're following us along at home and you'd like to join us in person, the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group meets on the first and third Wednesday of the month. And we'd love to have you in person so you can ask your own questions. You can find us on meetup.com. You can search for Research Triangle PowerShell User Group, or you can go to rtpsug.com. We have, if you're watching this on YouTube, we do have our own channel with about 110 videos from the last 3 years of meetings. So there's going to be pretty much something there for any PowerShell topics you can think of. We'd love for you to peruse the library after you watch your videos. Come back and join us in person. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to say goodnight to everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Stevie and Sean and everybody who helped make this another successful meeting. Thanks, everyone. Take care.